Hey everyone, welcome back to the Better Podcast here, where we talk about all things relating to local real estate. Today, we're going to be talking about zoning, a topic that we've presented on a bunch of times. We've had a lot of experience with. It's super important to the way we do our investments and why they're so successful. But we're going to frame it slightly differently this time, try to help everyone understand, the difference between what zoning looks like now and what zoning looks like in the future. So I'm going to start by asking everybody to close your eyes. Imagine you live in your house, you live in your apartment, and everything you need is just at your disposal, right? The local coffee shop is just a bike ride away. The grocery store is a one block walk, and you can, take a basket with you or take a bag with you, and you can bring your groceries back, smaller amounts because it's just so accessible. Your office is just a couple stops away on a train or a trolley. Now open your eyes. That's not the world we live in today. The world we live in today is much different than that. And we'll talk about Euclidean zoning, form based zoning, what the difference is, and why it's important. So, the context here is last week I got a chance to take a vacation, which is crazy. I think it's been a minute. I was in Europe. I went to visit some family over in Amsterdam. My sister lives out there, and what I saw there was really cool. We're kind of used to it in certain cities locally in New York and in Boston and Philly, where things are kind of stacked. But I think people just generally think about it as overwhelming or just everything placed in the same spot. But when you go overseas, when you go to Europe, not just Amsterdam, any of those cities, you can kind of see how everything was intentionally built that way so everything fits together. That's called form-based zoning, and that's not technical. That is deliberate. It's the difference between communities that adapt and communities that get stuck. So, like every American who spent real time, in Europe, there's a little bit of inspiration. There's a little bit of uniqueness, but there's also a little bit of frustration that comes with it because everything just works.
Yeah, I too have been to Amsterdam. It's awesome. It's a great time. A lot of people, think it's somehow because of the canals or anything like that, but this is really something that's all over Europe. And the way they developed and their cities, were semi-planned this way more for people than for cars because cars didn't exist at the time. And so it just wasn't feasible to be 20 miles outside of the city and hop in a car and in 20 minutes, or if you're in LA, I don't know, 2 hours, be in the downtown center. So you had to walk places and things were designed in that manner. And then like, before that we hopped on this call, Ian and I were actually just discussing like how interesting it was. Like one thing you really notice about Amsterdam is there are no trucks. Why are there no trucks? Like, that's a very American thing. In Europe, they have a city that like just doesn't have trucks even. The bike lanes are everywhere. It's just nice. And we'll dive into some of the more details of like why it's just like so nice to be able to walk around, just have a Heineken and, some fish on a cracker or whatever little hors d'oeuvres they serve over there. Like it feels really good and relaxing, that those people get to enjoy every day that we don't get to.
Yeah. I mean, we'll talk both, right, about the impact that it has on the community and the, ecosystem, but also the impact it has on everybody as individuals, right? It's just maybe like a health thing as well. So, I guess as far as who this podcast is for, right? Why you should listen. If you're a limited partner of ours, if you're a passive investor, if you invest in at all in real estate locally, you want to understand what regulatory environments look like. You want to understand what the future looks like. They'll affect things like returns, but not only returns, project viability and like how reasonable and sustainable and scalable your strategy is. Developers, builders trying to understand those codes as well, barriers to getting deals done, what kind of things are going to be possible in the future for you to build, and what kind of things are not going to be.
And really, when you compare like Europe to the United States, understanding that by changing these rules, you can create an environment in which everybody benefits. It isn't just, there's this common NIMBY, I don't know what you would call it, but mantra of like, all these rule changes are just so that developers can make more money. And that's not the case. I think a lot of cities like Durham, that's why we like Durham, understand that you can change these rules. Developers and builders can make more money and housing prices can come down at the same time. And that's the real objective of some of these changes as we look to switch to be more, quite frankly, European.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the city, like the municipalities and the people that work in the municipalities or people who want to be involved and create social change. City planners, housing advocates, anyone who's just trying to make the city of Durham specifically, but also Raleigh and other cities just a better place. right? How can we do that? And even if we don't take all of our ideas from cities like Amsterdam or even cities like New York or Philly, we can incorporate the best parts of that into what we have here because we're still building out the city. We still have an opportunity to create change in Durham. We don't necessarily have to create this suburban sprawl that has affected cities that are already fully developed, like Charlotte, like Atlanta, like Phoenix, San Antonio, Houston. We have the opportunity to take what they've done and what other cities have done and make it the optimal city for us. So let's just dive in, right? Let's talk a little bit about what the impact is and what zoning is. So, form-based zoning is zoning where everything is it allows everything to just kind of fit where it fits, right? So I described this scenario before where you leave your apartment and you can go to the coffee shop, you can go to the grocery store because it's close. But it's not like the city said, "Hey, we're going to allow you to put a coffee shop here, so put the coffee shop there." The city just said, "If you can fit it, if it makes sense, the community will take it in. You can put it there and it'll just kind of speak for itself, right? If it doesn't work in the community, it won't succeed and it'll turn into something that will succeed, right? So that is what we call form-based zoning. And Euclidean zoning or use zoning is what we generally have in Durham and Raleigh and cities like this in the US where you have your residential area where everybody lives in their quarter acre, half acre lot with their picket fence and their 2.5 kids, and then they get in their car and they drive to the work area where all the offices are, and then they once they leave work, they drive to the grocery area and the commercial like area where they can do all their errands and pick up their dry cleaning on the way home. And then there's obviously like the industrial area, and these are all separate, and they were designated by cities to be in those places before they actually saw whether or not it made sense, right? So we want to understand what the research says, what the actual empirical data says, like what do people think generally about what is preferred, what produces better outcomes, what produces better local economies, and what's more resilient. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. There also are, I mean, additionally, just some context too, that a lot of the, like, we called it use based, but it's also rules based. And a lot of these rules historically have been used to not just divide in the way that Ian is describing, but in a manner that is socially unjust and really put heavy parameters on what those rules are, on what you can do in certain areas, putting up buffers and locating certain types of housing available only to certain people, things of that nature. That if you put all residential as an equal rather than putting these rules in place here and there, you can cut away from some of those divides that have been made over the last 50 years or so.
Yeah. Yeah, especially in the South, right? I mean, in the there was zoning in the northern cities were not created for exactly the same reasons. But when we look at why zoning was created in the South, when cities were starting to get big here, there's a big racist history. And I think it's time, like it's long past time, right, that we start undoing those kind of things, both for the greater good and just because it's unjust, like you said.
Yeah, we could spend a few hours on even just how the highway was built, going around downtown Durham and what it's done to areas that looked more form-based previously.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Just to kind of structure how we talk about this, I think let's start with an introduction and then let's talk about a couple of the things that we hit on earlier. I've already briefly introduced what form-based zoning and use-based zoning is, but Devin, why don't you kind of elaborate on the what those are and the differences between the two?
Yeah, so when we talk about Euclidean rules based, really what we're talking about is defining even within a space what can really be done there. So it's like, okay, yeah, there's residential, but then there's, okay, this residential needs to look this exact way with this setback, this many stories, can't be this, can't be that. And that's in the city code, not just an HOA. And that's pretty much how most of these cities have developed. You need a certain minimum lot size, things of that nature. Minimum lot sizes, like you don't see that in cities. There's like this classic New York house that's only like 8 feet wide or whatever that sets some record. Like that's allowed there because you don't have a minimum lot size in that area. And so those are some of the rules that are there. Whereas a more form-based just says, hey, this neighborhood's supposed to be a walkable neighborhood, like, and it should have XYZ components, and therefore go build it. And commercially reasonable things will happen. If people are okay with their house being 2 feet away from each other, then people will buy it and that will be good and it will create housing supply and therefore it should be allowed. We have the technology now that we didn't have years ago where we can build that in a very safe manner. Although you can tell even in Europe, like these buildings that were built hundreds of years ago, they were built in a safe manner. The houses aren't falling over because the walls are touching. You know, when a fire happens, they're still relatively safe. We have sprinkler systems now. And so just saying, hey, this should be a mixed community across the board in any way you can define mixed community, that's true form-based zoning. No minimum lot sizes, no unit limitations, things of that nature. So
So I
that
guess
that does, yeah.
what you're saying is Euclidean zoning is basically deciding on what would work in theory and just assigning where things should go. And because it works in theory in someone's brain, they set it to be that way. Whereas form based zoning is let's kind of throw some spaghetti and see what works in practice, right? So we'll put it here. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, well, then we'll try something different.
Yeah, if someone thinks it can work, they should be able to try it, basically. And that's the shift that we're going to. And like even still, like obviously with these code changes that cities like Durham and Raleigh are doing, they're still very, very, very rules based rather than form based. You know, it's impossible to just flip a switch and be like, yep, we're Europe now. Like we don't quite have the infrastructure for that, and people's mindset isn't quite ready for it. You can see pushback of like, why are all these houses so close to each other? And at the same time, those same people being like, housing prices should be lower. And it's like not connecting the dots here that like construction costs what construction costs. Land you can change if you say 4 units can go where 1 unit used to be, and then other people trying to define for other people saying, well, I wouldn't want to live in a 1-bedroom condo that's only 500 square feet. And it's like, okay, well, you don't have to. But there are 2,000 other people in the city of Durham who are okay with that and would love to just buy that for $150,000 instead of buying a 3-bedroom suburban house for $450,000. And so having those available housing types, you get more variety when you don't put design restrictions on people. You get more variety to please more people. And quite frankly, builders are going to build things that people want. They're, you know, if you force the builders to build 3-bedroom houses, they're either going to build the 3-bedroom houses or they're not going to build. And that's the bigger problem when it comes to housing prices at the end of the day, because what if people want 2-bedroom houses, 1-bedroom houses, things of that nature? There just need to be more options for more people's situation. Everything can't be cookie cutter, act home, tear down 100 acres to build 200 half-acre houses.
Yeah. So before like I want to pause for a second before we dive into like the effect on housing and the effect on, you know, pricing especially, right? Because I think that's an important topic that we should spend some time on. But I think what a lot of people miss about form-based zoning versus Euclidean zoning is trying to create a city that feels a particular way. And I think today a lot of people are moving places just because they like that a city is small or quaint or you know just the way that it attracts you, and they're not as worried with, well, I need to make sure I have exactly 1647 square feet in my house, and I need to make sure that I have a stair. You know, they want to live in a place where things are happening and where things feel right to them. And I think form-based zoning allows people to feel more neighborly, cohesive together, whereas Euclidean zoning almost puts out this like isolated feeling, right?
Yeah, you're literally physically further away with the way those rules are. And that like it doesn't sound like much when you say it, but like, you know, knowing your neighbors is a thing that like I think we've seen a shift in this country even, you know, last like I mean maybe there's some technology components on that, but there's a heavy demand now for wanting that community feeling back, I think. Just because of how separated we've all gotten with technology and being on our phones, and you know, people wanted to just like cut out that and see somebody else's face and know that they live there and that they own the coffee shop and like, hey, this is my neighbor.
Yeah, it's actually a really good point with the social isolation, people wanting a little bit more community. I think also that social isolation has driven this idea that people are overwhelmed by cities, right? I grew up in New York. I love New York. I love how it feels and I love the busyness and the streets and how everything is moving. But when I speak with most people about New York, they're like, "Oh, I would never live there. It's too much. There's too much going on. It's too busy. Everyone's in a rush." But those exact same people, they don't really want to live on a farm either, right? They don't want to be completely isolated where it's 20 minutes to the nearest grocery store or to see a friend, right? They don't want their neighbor to be a mile away. So they want something that's kind of in the middle. And the suburban sprawl, like the suburban lifestyle, doesn't exactly scratch that itch because they want to be able to go to a brewery or go to a restaurant or go to a a baseball game like the Durham Bulls, just like kind of mixed in with this downtown community. So I think form-based zoning, we think of places like Amsterdam or like New York City, but is there a way to create form-based zoning that feels a little bit more intimate?
Yeah, and I think Durham is pushing towards that. You know, they're just kind of, at least assuming this new code passes, there are certain districts where it's just, hey, you can build 3-story boxes and anything that fits can go there. And so you get a little bit of height on it, but not an overwhelming height. It still feels small and close, and it's walkable and bikeable and things of that nature, where it's not overwhelming, but it still has everything you need. Like you're talking in the intro about, hey, I just want to go to the corner grocery store. You know, when we talk about Europe, I mean, obviously their grocery stores are a little different, but just being able to go there and get a little bit of food, bring it back, it's fresh, and you're not worried about having to make this mega 3-hour trip to the grocery store to pick up all your groceries for a long period of time. You're just going, getting what you need the next day or two, and coming back. And you're healthier. You're walking. You're not driving.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, Amsterdam obviously has this like intricate biking system, which I think is so cool, and we could talk about for a while. Like their land is obviously very flat, and so um, I think about it, and I was there, and all of Dutch food is fried. All of anywhere you go, you're just kind of like clouded with smoke because everyone is smoking. It's just like the culture there. So if you're eating fried food and you're smoking, why does everyone still look so much healthier than everybody else in the United States, right? And it's because they're walking everywhere, they're biking everywhere, they're just moving more, and it's easier to source like fresher groceries because people go grocery shopping every couple days rather than buying like 5 pounds of lettuce for the for the next couple weeks to feed your family, right? You don't need to just like stock up because everything's close together. So I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
Thank you.
So okay, we talk about the feel and the health and what people are looking for, but obviously housing itself, both the form and the pricing of the housing is our bread and butter, right? It's what we do at Better, and it's super important to what we do. Even when we develop, more dense areas where we can put more housing, we're not just like shoving as much as we can because the shape and the feel and like what people want in housing is really, really important to us. How does form-based zoning specifically improve like the greater good, right, on a larger scale with housing both, let's say, in Durham, but any city that can implement this?
Yeah, so I sort of alluded to it a little bit before about coming down to numbers at some point. Numbers, look, feel, community, all of these things that has a lot of interested parties in it. You have the government, you have an end buyer, you have the people who are building it like us, you have developers, and you have people who just are looking at it, other community members who have various reasons for being here. And they all have their motives for why they want things to look a certain way. But at the end of the day, especially in a city like Durham, like generally speaking, we all live here. So we check multiple boxes. Like I'm building that house, but I also want to go to the bar that's next to it. And I want, to build good housing that's affordable, that people want to live in. And the city wants that too. The people buying it want that too. Everybody wants this, and maybe there's just a little disagreement on how to get there. And so people want this convenience. They want the price down to what they can afford. What we push for, that would make our lives easier is less regulation, more density, things of that nature that allows us to put all of these components together. And unfortunately, in Durham, the government is pushing towards that, which allows us to have that flexibility I mentioned earlier. And when you have flexibility, you can build a duplex, or you could build a quad, or build townhouses, build an office on top of a restaurant that has 2 apartments on top of it. That in theory sounds great, but trying to do that in today's world, generally speaking, is very difficult. And so being able to offer all of those options by switching to more form-based, where you can build a 3-story building that has residential office and restaurant or some other use, helps solve that. When you actually pull on the numbers and understand that there need to be incentives for everybody to create the outcome that everybody agrees they want.
Yeah, that's a really good point you just made, right? Because I think to scale it back to the government, right? Like we are in a lot of countries, the government kind of supplies this affordable housing for people where they provide an alternative or a method for people who can't reach the median income to get housing. But in the United States, the government doesn't do that. The government relies on private developers and private builders to create this affordable housing. And what they do is instead they incentivize them to build these houses. And so if the incentives don't align with the proper housing that's needed to be built, like everybody, I think all good people want to do good for the community. And we definitely want to provide and help the community, especially because we live in this community, but we're also not a nonprofit. So at the same time, we can't just go out and just donate houses to people, right? And the incentives need to align. And what you touched on was missing middle. So what we call the missing middle, which is different forms of housing, right? It's either generally we think of suburban sprawl with either houses or like these big downtown condos, right, where there's like hundreds and hundreds of units in them. Can you talk a little bit about the missing middle, something we've obviously talked about before, and how that actually aligns with the government's goal in getting private developers and private builders to supply more affordable housing?
Yeah, yeah. So we could back up to something you said in the intro, talking about the suburban sprawl.
Yeah.
And historically, you got your 1 acre house with, at this point, has grown to be a McMansion, 4,000 square feet, in a town that's outside of downtown, actually, and you drive there. And that's historically how people are living. And I mean, right now, an unfortunate situation in the economy is that makes a lot of sense to a lot of developers, and why you're building that house and selling it for $2 million rather than building these other types of housing like townhouses, smaller single family homes on smaller lots, um, duplexes so that rent pricing can come down, quadruplexes, multiplexes in general, things of that nature. Durham has actually more recently approved projects that have actually decreased rent by building more apartment size of different sizes and things of that nature. And so, there has been some success by switching to more of this. If you actually want to see case studies on it in Durham and Raleigh, approving more multifamily basically, and not just these single family homes that are 4,000 square feet on a big lot that sells for $2 million.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess we take all of this, we take what it means for the feel of the city, the look of the city, the good of the city, but also the good of the people, and creating this, the term affordable housing kind of sometimes can stink to use because it can mean so many different things. But we can say lowercase a affordable housing or attainable housing or just lowering the prices. So we've hit those topics. So why do we build here, right? Because at the end of the day, like we want to help people understand why this is important to us beyond just the social reasons. So when we talk about form-based zoning and the shift in that direction, what does that mean for our investments that we're making?
Yeah, we're in the right place at the right time in a lot of ways. Like, we're not fighting for anything like that. It's kind of there as long as the government continues to want to solve the problem in the same way that everyone agrees it should be solved, which is making it easier to build more housing for more people, because the opposite of that, making it harder to build, is a problem. And so we're going into environments where it is allowing us to build at the same cost that it would be in Durham. We want to create good housing that, a starter home for $400,000, that we're building several of those on a job site using new rules that came in 2024. We're making a profit. And when I tell people we're selling these in the 400s, they're like, that's amazing. In Durham, new build construction in the 400s for a 3-bedroom house, it just doesn't sound, um, it just doesn't sound feasible, weirdly enough, to a lot of people. And I know there are going to be people in California who are like, "Oh my god, a 3-bedroom house for 400,000? How could anybody like?"
The cost of living is different here, right?
Yeah, because other people are used to that starter home being in the 600s, and like people from California are like 600s for a starter home. But like if you think about it in terms of percents, selling for 450 instead of 600, I mean that's amazing. And because of these rule changes that happened in 2024, we are able to build, get a return, and provide an end unit that wasn't done with corners cut or anything like that. So people are happy in that house. They have something close to downtown, and we're able to provide that because of very specific rules changes that made it more form based. I love talking about. I was just on that job site the other day. I love talking about it. I could spend a lot more time on it, but yeah, that is a clear example. I've got tons of these examples. If you want me to talk about another one, I will. But
I mean, at the end of the day, right, we can only control what we can control, right? We can't control the price of materials. We can't control the price of labor for our subcontractors, like our electrician and our plumber. The market kind of speaks for itself in that regard. So and people are still looking for the same thing, right? I feel like a broken record, right? People just want a good product that's built well at a price that makes sense for them. And so how do you take the changing prices of labor and materials and try to align it with this? And you talked about this earlier, right? You can make land more usable, which makes land worth more and something that we can maybe get for less. And then we can build on and then sell for less. So the city of Durham is moving in a direction that allows us to do that. And I think that's the main takeaway here, right?
Yeah, and I guess just to be more explicit too, like we talk about money, we're talking about money, price, price, price. One other component here is time. Time is money, not just a saying, but truly like when we talk about deregulating, just being able to shift through the system faster to be like, hey, in Durham, you can go, hey, this one lot should be 3 lots. It's allowed by right. Please just stamp this rather than having to go to city council or anything like that is amazing. Those sorts of exemptions, or in Raleigh, if you're small enough, you can go quicker through. Like that is another way you can decrease cost. And so going to these governments that have made these provisions for builders like us to do that, where we're not saying, hey, we're taking farmland and building 200 houses, it's being like water, going to the path of least resistance.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, when we think about it, like kind of taking a step back and looking at everything we've spoken about, right? We started by saying, form-based zoning versus Euclidean zoning, and it sounds kind of boring, right? It sounds like, okay, like I get it, it's zoning, it's just like something that people are putting together. But when you break it down, we've actually identified a whole gamut of like things that this impacts and why it's important because people don't care about what their house is zoned as, but they care about how their city feels. And they care about what their like what who their neighbors are, and they care about all of these things and the price of getting their next house, because even someone who's already bought a house and has a house, well, they're maybe going to have kids, right? And so they may need to move up, and they want that space that they've currently lived in to work for someone else, and they want an easy time finding what they're going to find. So it's not just some planning conversation that belongs in like the annals of city hall and something that we generally shouldn't be involved with. Like, I think people should be involved in this conversation, and in order to get involved in this conversation, you really have to understand the difference between these like zoning systems, if you will.
Yeah, we see if you go to some city council meetings in Durham, you see some people who don't do their research but have opinions, and fortunately,
Welcome to America, Devin.
yeah, fortunately, like there's a good crowd of generally educated people in Durham and what they want their city to look like, who have educated opinions. And we're just very fortunate. We have a good city council that listens to that and cares about, pushing in this manner that, creating missing middle housing, but also making sure that all these small businesses like us are able to make a profit and give back to the community in that manner.
Yeah, we have the opportunity. Like I said, Durham is at a point where it's not Charlotte or it's not New York right now, and it's sort of this growing city where people are trying to get a feel for and trying to move to and trying to like create and form in a way that works best for them. And so we have an opportunity to take what we've learned from cities all over the world and all over the United States to try and create what makes the most sense. Not for 1926, not for 1966, right? But for 2026. So let's get rid of all of the outdated, like previous ideas that don't really make sense, whether it's for social reasons or whether it's for practical reasons, right? Like we have certain things like sprinkler systems, like you said, that we didn't have before. So we're now in a place where we can create the ideal city for us now. And I think form-based zoning is what really does that for us.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, oh man, it would be a little diatribe to talk about AI and how that's going to change things in driverless cars and how you don't need parking, et cetera, et cetera. But that could all fit into what you're talking about how you want this city to be and what does it mean if you don't need parking lots.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So if you do want to hear more about AI and driverless cars and more construction sites that Devin really can go on and on and about, we are super reachable. We have meetups. We have a monthly on the third Wednesday of each month just for our investors and any industry professionals or anyone who really wants to come and just kind of chat. We have a quarterly meetup where we talk about things like this in a more public setting. We talk about some of our projects that we've done and why it makes sense and why we think it's best for the community and of course how it's been good for our investors as well. You can always reach out to us through our website, through social media, or really just give us a call. Like, we're always happy to chat. I think we're trying to spread the good word here. So if you have any questions, please do reach out. Make sure to like and subscribe. Follow us from our podcast. We'll be posting short little clips of this all over YouTube and LinkedIn, Instagram as well. So we're around.
Yeah, let us know. That's how you'll find out about how AI and driverless cars are going to affect zoning and whatnot, or whatever topic you want to hear. Let us know.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one.